We're going to now transition over to our panel. So we have some wonderful folks here. We'll start with Michael Barton. If you wouldn't mind saying who you are, what's your area of expertise, and what's the current state of education in that area?
Hi.
I know, big one. Sorry.
Yeah. So Michael Barton, I'm a associate professor at CCSU in elementary ed. I used to be an elementary school teacher for quite a long time. So I'm also coming at it from that perspective too, knowing where you all are. So my work is racial and sexual identity. So what I'm doing here is looking at really being the advocate for the LGBTQ plus community. So the state of affairs, I would say, I think we become complacent in Connecticut that it's not going to happen, but there is a full-on assault on the queer community in many, many, many states, couched under parents' rights. So I can get into more of that, but I think as we do this, thinking that Connecticut is going to be immune from it, it's wrong, because a lot of parents are attacking school board members and teachers for trying to be queer inclusive. So it's not a bright spot right now. Let's say that. Okay,
thanks so much. Let's go.
I ask Tony, okay, I apologize. Please. Michael, we got to see the second line of your t-shirt. I can only see the first line.
It says Donald Trump is only for now. My friends got it for me from Avenue Q, and this is my Disney that my friend got me a few years ago that I think is quite apropos for, hey, DeSantis.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
Let's go to Sam next. Sam, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, saying your area of expertise and what's the current state of education in that area.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Kaliva. I have 8 years of experience as a classroom teacher, many years of curriculum experience, and I just left that world this year to become the director of curriculum and instruction for the Mohegan Tribe. So my area of expertise is Native American Studies, where that's located in curriculums right now. Coming from an elementary school, I know there's small glimpses of teaching it in 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade. Some fortunate districts have actual classes studying it in high school. Sometimes we see it in civics or US history, but I'm here as a member of the Mohegan Tribe to give plentiful resources and share whatever I can.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Dr. Yancey?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. In a very similar spirit, I'm an assistant professor of humanities at Goodwin University. I specialize in African American history with a particular focus on Black and Brown women's intellectual and political history. So I look at particularly 20th century Black women's history very specifically. So I am here as a content expert in African American history, US history, women's history. Those are the areas and the courses that I teach. I just completed my doctorate at the University of Connecticut. So I'm very excited to be here and really look forward to working with all of you. If you were to ask me the question about what's going on in my field of African American history, I mean, I follow Michael's remarks in terms of the full-on assault on the teaching of the comprehensive history of African American people and the people of African descent, not only in this country, but globally. Very particularly, I think something I can just throw out there is very concerned about the banning of books. I mean, that's just one example how this is really a full-on assault at this moment. So I look forward to talking through solutions and certainly available for any resources that you may need.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's go right over to Nita Diaz, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Nita and I am a consultant at CERC, the State Education Resource Center. My graduate work was on the anthropology of education, but I focus at CERC. I teach around SPED and English learners, multilingual learners, and racial equity, and the Latino and Puerto Rican studies side. I'm here to talk about that expertise. And your question was very interesting to me because what I would answer to that would be, we don't have anything because they don't really know we're here. We're non-existent to so many people. It is really, truly, and I say that because I just read an article that said the slate of candidates for the state of Connecticut Democratic endorsement was really diverse. So I was like, wow. And then it was only African Americans and whites. So for me, that is the state of Latino and Puerto Ricans. We are just as invisible as anybody else. That is the attack I feel we're getting.
Okay, thank you so much. And let's go to Chris Newell, please.
Hi, everybody. Chris Newell. I'm a Passamaquoddy citizen living in Pequot Homelands in Mashantucket. I am a co-founder and director of education of Agamemnon Educational Initiative. And I always tell people kind of a lifelong educator, because when you're native and you leave your homelands, you end up having to educate everybody you meet about your existence. So I've been doing this for a while. I'm a second generation educator. My father, Wayne Newell, recognized by the Department of the Interior as during his lifetime as a living treasure for the work that he did with education. And so I'm fortunate in that I grew up in a household where this work was ongoing throughout my childhood, and have an understanding that it's multi-generational. So my focus is on, or what we do at Agamemnon is we consult K through 12, not just classroom educators, but also administrators, school systems, colleges, universities, museums, which is our forte, as well as media, and incorporating native content in a culturally competent manner. And the question of the state of education of Native studies, as somebody that comes from the state of Maine, where Wabanaki people are really present, the Wabanaki Studies mandate was passed in 2001, and it's only next fall that a school district is fully implementing it. So 21 years after the law was passed, so I realize that with the Native Studies mandate we have here in Connecticut, it's a very exciting time, but it's also a time of a lot of enduring work that we have coming up ahead of us. The level of erasure of Native peoples when I first arrived here in this region was actually pretty appalling and shocking, which is one of the reasons why we founded Agamemnon Educational Initiative, to see what we could do, because I want to raise my children in this place and have them acknowledged, and not have the question, the surprise that they even exist. We want to get to a better understanding, and also for the non-Native students that are growing up in the state, to avoid those awkward interactions they have once they exit the state and they are in more diverse audiences and they meet Native people. They don't have those awkward interactions because of the lack of study of Native peoples. So that's a lot of the work that we do is, with the system, and also with individual educators, a top-down, bottom-up approach.
Okay, thank you so much. You actually have a video submission from Jason Chang. He wasn't able to be here today because he's traveling home from Hawaii, so I don't feel too bad for him, but I do want to play just a short video, just about 5 minutes or so. It's a similar introduction to what we've heard. So let me just go ahead and share, and then I will hit play.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Chang. I'm an associate professor of history and Asian and Asian American studies at the University of Connecticut. I also direct the Institute for Asian and Asian American Studies there. Let's see, I wear a couple of other hats that are sort of relevant to this work. I am on the Governor's Hate Crimes Advisory Council, co-chair of the Subcommittee on Community Awareness. I sit on the Board of Education in West Hartford, And I'm also the state director for our campaign, Make Us Visible Connecticut, which has been advocating for Asian American and Pacific Islander studies in the legislature. So we had 2 bills, one last year, one this year, doing great work, well, obviously with the K-8 model curriculum, and this year making AAPI studies mandatory. So very excited about this work, and just so, excited for this team to be tackling this with all of its other dimensions, and my fellow panelists here. So this is really important work, and really visionary to thinking about what is 21st century social studies and public education mean. What does that look like? So very, very excited for this work, and to be working with you. So I've been asked to kind of think through a couple different things. One is just to applaud this kind of formation, or these 6 themes of the standards of justice, representation, inclusivity, global context, agency, and local connections. And really think these are wonderful touchstones that will, I think, continue to it helps me to refocus my thoughts on how to build what we've been thinking of as homegrown Asian American studies and Pacific Islander studies in Connecticut. What does that look like for our state here? And so this is really important work. And then to just kind of give an understanding of what's sort of the current state of Asian American studies and Pacific Islander studies. I mean, as many of you probably know, this has been a very challenging, time for Asian Americans, with record increases in surges in hate crimes against Asian Americans. With just this week, shootings against 3 Korean women were shot in Dallas. So the ways that the legacy and the tradition of anti-Asian hatred in the country has kind of bubbled up through the pandemic has reinforced this a long need to address invisibility that our community has faced, and so right now, I think what we could say is that there is kind of an Asian American renaissance happening. Many other states like Connecticut are thinking about hate prevention through education, through anti-violence, anti-racism work happens through education, not through policing, and so seeing this kind of work happening in other states is very exciting, and they will have to do their own work to think of what it means for them. And what all of this has done is really generated a new generation of Asian Americans who want to be involved, who want to help shape the future, and that this has been organized around the need for more education. And so it's very exciting, because what this means is, with attention to K-12 education and Asian American studies, we're going to be looking at we'll be creating the educational conditions for the first generation of Asian Americans in the country. This is 2022, to be seen in the curriculum in public education. This just hasn't happened before. The notion that that Asian Americans have been contributors and belong to the country had not been present in the national discourse. And so it has led to their invisibility. So this is really exciting. First time in the country's history to have this kind of mobilization. So this is really, important work here in Connecticut that other states are going to be looking at and watching, see how we do this work. So, and we're very excited and think this is going to be a wonderful way to show other states what, what their work could look like.
Okay. It really is an amazing, he submitted 25 minutes. Obviously, I'm not going to play the whole thing here, but it just keeps going on and on with more just gems. If you were going to dig into there, you would find a gold mine. But what I'd like to turn to next is thinking about, well, how is it that we can go ahead and get this right? I'd like to ask the panel, what does it look like, or how can we get it right in terms of creating these standards in your mind? And anyone can jump in. I'm going to try to just kind of open it up at this point.
So I would say, don't underestimate any age, any grade level, because they, having taught elementary myself and as everybody's worked in certain aspects of school, the kids are the ones who want to know all these things. And so bringing in and confronting the questions that they have is something I just think that, and I speak from elementary, that many elementary teachers are hesitant to do. But it's so important because they're the ones who have all the questions, and to not be fearing what outsiders are going to say, because you are the content. We're the people that know a lot of these things too. The other thing I would just say is, when you write the standards, like when I work with my undergrads, some of the standards are quite repetitive and they're quite, I don't want to say overly broad, but it's like, then there's the questions and the students get very specific on the language in. And so as you rewrite and think about things, it's hard to articulate, but I've been reviewing their finals and they've all looked at the C3 framework, and there tends to be some sort of like, I'm not really sure what this is asking, so I'll just throw this here. But
go ahead, Sam, jump in.
Sure. I'd like to add to that too. I think it's important, starting in elementary school too, to make sure that the educators are educated and have enough resources to be able to teach everything that we're coming together to do. If a student receives a question and the educator doesn't know the answer, then we're kind of stopped, we're halted.
Great. Brittany?
Yeah, certainly. I'm going to build on that. Really seeking, again, this is why we're here, come to council with us, with the experts. But then also too, one of the things that I really love about the guiding principles and the themes are the inclusion of community advisory, like really tapping into, these communities. One of the things I will just say, and this is just, again, talking about communities that fall at the intersection. A lot of times we know that is not represented in our trainings. It's not, represented in, our education sometimes, right? And so going into the community, right, building that relationship with these communities is critical. There's so many community historians, local historians, that can, again, come in and talk to you and help you flush out, right, some of those areas that you perhaps may not be familiar with, and give you critical insight.
I'll jump in really quickly here, and especially when it comes to Native content, the challenge some of the fears I think that we have had in the past when it comes to tackling this topic. America exists as a result of multiple genocides that happen to Native people, and sometimes the question of age appropriateness comes up when introducing the concept. But what I would counter with is that our children are in your schools. 70% of Native peoples live off reservation. Our children are in your schools and are coming into your schools well aware of this history, and they are okay with it. They've been learning it since they were babies. And to see it not acknowledged, to see it actually glossed over, or to be made to look prettier than the history actually is a disservice to those students, and also a disservice to your own students. And I can say from experience that, you know, teaching things like the Pequot War, you know, at the Pequot Museum to third graders, they have a definite understanding that they are not responsible, you know, for any of that history. That is not, you know, on their shoulders. But what they do is they exit that museum with a much deeper understanding of how Connecticut came to be Connecticut. And it might surprise you, but they, you know, learning that hard history, they actually leave more excited because they hear about the Mohegans and the Pequots that are here now and were resilient through all of it. And that's the amazing part of it all. So challenge, you know, some of the fears that have, you know, been present when it comes to tackling Native content.
A challenge off of that too is once students leave the museum and leave the story of the Pequot War, are we also teaching into the present tense of Native American communities? So not continuing that education through 12th grade, I think is also a challenge, being stuck in the past.
Steve has a point, but I was hoping maybe Nitsa could get in. Go ahead, Nitsa.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to add to what Dr. Yancey was saying, and both from the Native American studies perspective as well, but for Latinos as well, I do think that when we start with elementary school, but also including community, and even asking students who are, I do think third graders would give you a little bit about what they want, and fourth graders, you know, I teach 5th and 6th grade, so they definitely know what they would like to know about. But if we take it in the standards and do it into like by levels, I always think about it like individual, group, event, or category for our students that includes communities and families, is going to get us to have our young ones and little ones to really understand who we are as human beings, as people with many different ethnicities, many different cultures, many different races. That's how I kind of see it, that in the how do we might align it based on what they need to know, but also developmentally, regardless of grade level, but just developmentally age-wise.
Thank you for that. Steve?
Yeah, just a question. I'm involved in the side on an organization called Discovering Amistad, which you may or may not know of, but we did some programming in a district over last month, and 10 parents refused to sign the permission slip allowing their students to attend because their thought was the program was made to make their students, their white kids feel bad. And so they would not let their kids take part. Is there anything we can do as standards writers to, I mean, how would you deal with that? And do you think, is there anything that standards could do to prevent that thing?
I'll jump in with my personal approach on that. I tend to be a humanist in that we're all human beings, and that this, you know, these histories we're all here as a result of. You know, so collectively as human beings, we can learn from where where things went awry, right? Where bad things happened, and by admitting them out loud, we can learn collectively as human beings how to exist in this world together going forward. So I'm always future forward thinking, you know, about that. And, you know, so sometimes it does require that, you know, we are uncomfortable sometimes when it comes to learning these pieces of history. That's okay, but also realizing the human being in them and the potential for them, you know, that they can be contributors to a better future. You know, regardless of what happened in the past we cannot change, but being real about it and admitting where we as human beings went wrong is the way we as human beings can do better going forward.
Yeah, I love that, Chris. I think that we have to get to a place where we are telling full truths, where we are ensuring that our students are able to see themselves in a full, humane way. And one of that is by respecting the truth. And I think that we have to help parents, our community, school boards, and districts recognize that we cannot continue with the half truths that are oftentimes represented in our history books. It's completely will not get us right to the goal that we're seeking. We have to delve into these topics. And I want to just reiterate what has already been stated, that we may be surprised that our younger kids are ready to delve into these topics. And it is oftentimes the adults and the educators sometimes that are not ready. And I think that we have to challenge ourselves and recognize that we can have these conversations in a classroom when we prepare for it, when we train for it, when we're in community with our classes, with our communities. We can go and have these conversations and facilitate a wonderful conversation about humanity, right? We can do that. And I think we really need to take that step forward. And I think it's forums like this that can help us get there.
I just
Yeah,
wanted
I would
to add,
also, oh, sorry, Nita, go ahead.
I just wanted to add really fast, and maybe I'm going to sound a little bit harsh, but sometimes I think about as a parent, and I thought about my children's school, right? When they decided to change the curriculum in humanities for 6th grade, they met with us and said, we are no longer doing Shakespeare, we are no longer doing this, we are no longer doing that. And we just want to tell you why. This is the historical truth. These are the books. If you are not happy with it, there are many schools that will take your children. And that was harsh. That was harsh because this is a private school with people who pay a lot of money. So I thought about it and I was like, okay, is it because it's private? I know the public school is a little different, but when they said that and then they explained the whole thing, it was interesting because then some parents who were opposed to that understood that it was relevant, that their own children were asking for this. It was not that somebody came and said, we're just going to do this. So I wonder sometimes, how do we have that balance of both? I'm not saying it's good or bad, but do we need to think about that? When the parents say no for the signing the consent form, you know, how do we ensure that they understand what their children are missing? And if at the end of the day, it's still their choice. But I need to be very explicit and honest in a way that helps them understand why are we doing what we're doing, whether they want to listen or not. Because we have to, like, for me, I believe that we have to do it and have that balance if we want to move forward. This is my own idealistic way.
Nita, I agree. And with any change, right, in education, we need transparency. We have to include all stakeholders. We should be including parents with curriculum changes. But I've always had a challenge teaching all of these topics in 4th grade where students come back into the classroom and they say, my parents said that's not true, you know? So having those conversations with parents, families, and students, I think it's really important.
Yeah, it happens at all levels, right? My parents said no. I think part of the other thing I noticed in the chat, it's the, if you have principals or admin. So part of it is, again, what am I doing wrong, right? What is it? And when the principal can't give you an answer, you know, it just tells the power of what we're doing. And I think the other thing is the people who are so opposed to these, you know, changes are literally the most vocal, and 85% of the people are just sitting at home being like, just educate my child, right? Like, so I think we get caught up in the people who are the loudest, who really are the small minority in many, many, many ways, because they become very vocal and threatening to people, right? And I think that others just in society, this is like Nita said, my own personal view, I just think in society, we sit back and sort of like just things continue to go the way they go. And again, we're not telling people to overthrow the US government, which again was okay for some people, right? Like, I guess last year. But I just, what are we doing wrong? What is it about this book about, you know, a child grappling with their sexuality, or, you know, these are not, and I think the other thing too, that just, these are not new things for us, right? Like this has been happening for decades. And I just think because of the hyperness of social media, the quickness of things, that's where I just think we've become more not sensitized, more like, wow, it's really happening. But it's been happening. Ask any queer, Black, brown, indigenous, Latino, you know, Asian teacher, you know, multiracial. They've been facing this hate for so long, right? Just by their existence in the classroom.
Thank you so much for that. You know, I want to turn from big picture ideas to a little bit more pragmatism. I'm hoping that folks can tell me what do these standards, or what should these standards look like? So when we take these ideals and we actually make it happen, what needs to be included? What can we not miss? What's the piece that we have to really think about in order to make sure that we're telling the story correctly?
My first thought is multiple perspectives. I think any group of peoples have more than one perspective, and we would be doing a disservice to any children if we didn't provide resources on multiple sides.
But I would say that part of I agree, except when we give equal weight to perspective, does it come at a point where we say, you know, everybody's perspective matters? Because then it becomes a relativistic endeavor that it's like, does it really matter? And okay, I'm going to have you support the Nazis and you not support the Nazis. Like, it's understand, and I know where you're coming from with this. Like, I totally get it. But I just think as we write these, sometimes I'm just also speaking as working with the future teachers who are reading these standards, who are interpreting them as like the word, right? So they're like, but I have to give both sides. I'm like, do you give both sides in the sense that, okay, now we just move on and you write a poster supporting this and that, like, or do we challenge students to understand why these perspectives, the social context that they're coming out of, right? And I think that that's to your point. And so the other thing I would say is when we're looking at, you know, the humanistic human rights part of this, that I know Anita made a comment about community. We're all community. It's the same thing. I mean, first, second, kindergarten through second is all about community, and nothing in there says I'm not the queer community. So people don't even realize that we are a community, right? That when we're talking community, this is what we could do. So even being sort of explicit in like, here are examples, right? That I think teachers can lean on, because if the reproduction of knowledge has been the same thing for you, you're going to continue being like, we have a nurse, we have a police officer. I mean, are we teaching children to question these things, right? So I'll step off.
I agree. I think too, something that oftentimes comes up in some of the conversations we've had over the last year is approaching this work through an intersectional lens, seeing those whose experiences fall at the intersections, right? It's not a political approach. To me, it's a humanistic approach that allows for the fullness and the wholeness of community, of groups to be seen when you see the diverse ways in which, right, power has worked in history and how that has affected communities very differently. Gets into a little bit more of a complex narrative, but it allows for those varying perspectives to be represented in its appropriate context. And so, you know, when we're thinking about, like, for example, okay, this is probably a bad example, but I just throw this out there because she's on my mind. When we talk about Rosa Parks, someone that we're going to learn about, right? K through 12, we talk about her all the time, but we talk about her in a very simplistic way. We talk about her, the only action that she did was in 1955 on the bus boycott, right? We don't talk about her decade of work that came prior to the bus boycott of her collecting rape testimonies throughout Alabama for the NAACP, talking about Black women who were being raped by white supremacists, right? Like, you know, how she was a feminist in that role. And this was a decade prior to 1950s. And so when we talk about and we widen our lens and we look at the intersections of people and groups and communities and their histories, we get a more complex narrative. We're able to get into some of those complex discussions that illuminates a fuller picture of history. And that's, I'm hoping that as you all go into this process, that you're thinking in that way about bringing those intersections together and getting to what Sam was talking about bringing those varying perspectives to the center to paint a fuller picture.
I just, before I forget, Dr. Yancey, on that point about, it's like with Ruby Bridges, right? Everybody's like, Ruby Bridges is such a brave, but are we teaching the kids the weight of hundreds of years that was placed on this first grader, right? I think that as you start writing and thinking about it, stop being so simplistic in our narratives of, she was so brave, right? She had centuries of this nation's like racial history on her, and we should be teaching the students what all of that means, right? So on that, yeah.
Nitsa.
I just wanted to add, you know, when I started studying anthropology, I remember that the professor said, we believe that there should be multiple perspectives. However, going to your point, where he said to me, however, there's something called universal human rights. We do not agree with incest. We do not agree with the Holocaust. We do not agree that enslaved people, that was okay. So we are not asking you to give us that perspective. And I was like, wow. So sometimes we are afraid of being that explicit. And they were not saying anything wrong to say that there are things that are universal for all of us that we need to understand that we're not and are not okay. So with that said, I was reminded of what there's a book in the intersectionality world from Julia Alvarez, who wrote a diary just like Anne Frank when the Dominican dictator Trujillo was looking for her family, which is why, you know, in real life, this is why they came to the USA. And it's the same format as Anne Frank to demonstrate to people that this universality of human rights can be intersected, that is not only happening in one part of the world, but it's happened to more than one group of people, along the fact that, you know, Trujillo didn't think that Haitian or dark Dominicans were good enough, were humans. So she wrote these letters like Anne Frank, and when you read both pieces, our students get the point of what we want in them to learn about in that historical piece.
I'll just throw in a couple of things that, you know, if you've, I know some of the folks here have been on professional developments with me and have probably heard me say this before. But I mean, this applies to Native histories, but it can, a lot of these can apply across the board. Number one is, you know, realizing that we're speaking in a foreign language to this land. We're speaking in the English language. And so English is not the first language for every student in your classroom, and just normalizing the fact that we are speaking in a foreign language to this land, especially when it comes to Native studies, because the English language has created generalized terminology like Native American, American Indian, and all of those types of things, which don't describe us accurately at all. They are European conceptualizations, and they are oftentimes a barrier for greater learning about the Mohegans, the Pequots, the Schaghticoke peoples, and those histories. Resetting the time clock of history, the American school system since the 19th century has been basically starting the time clock with European discovery, right? Discovery, and skipping over the 12,000 years of indigenous occupation and sustainability that existed here prior to that, since the last ice age. So in that center, when it comes to Native stories, you start centering resources on the living Native communities that we have here, not just the ones in the state, but also including the Stockbridge Munsee Mohicans, who also have history in this region as well. So broadening that, outside and trying to undo the extractive nature of the way Native histories have been taught through archaeology and anthropology, where non-Native folks have come into our communities, extracted these, interpreted them, wrote books, made careers out of it, and those have been the standards that have been used since the 19th century. Let's undo that. Let's listen to the living Native communities that are here now and let them tell their own histories, and then that way we can kind of compare and contrast how it gets taught previously to how they teach it in their own communities. So, and then a scaffolding, so oftentimes we compartmentalize everything, but when it comes to Native history, Native people are there throughout the entirety of what we call American history. The American Revolution, Native people assisted, and had promises, guaranteed that were never lived up to. When it comes to the Industrial Revolution, right, Native people are present during that. The Mohawk steelworkers that built New York City. There's so much of it that we can, incorporate into the histories that we already teach, and so that scaffolding it in that fashion, starting from kindergarten onward, making sure that the understanding for kindergartners is that Native people live here in the state, they contribute to it, and start from there, right? So I tend to start in the present with the living Native communities, and then go, into the history from there, so to get over some of the implicit biases that have been created by the American public school system since the 19th century.
All right, with just about 10 minutes left, I'd like to open up for question. If anyone would like to maybe put one in the chat or open your mic and ask a question, now would be the time. Oh, I think Mike wants to say something while we're getting ready.
I'm looking at Jen's question, and I was just like, I work in teacher prep with elementary, so I don't know what you were asking. I was looking. Sorry.
Oh, what I'm finding is that some elementary teachers come out of a teacher prep program, and some of us had like a dual, bachelor's with the social studies area, but many don't. And many may have only had to take one US history survey course, which could have been taught by someone who was not, exposing them to sort of the richness of the multiple perspectives, or not, it's depending. And others, there's even the science and social studies methods classes are combined. So their ability to have these conversations coming out of the prep programs are limited. And so those of us who are working with districts in professional development, with those groups of people working with the standards, as our team considers writing things that can be delivered and operational, I'm always considering what can be done, and I'm thrilled that to hear you're working with elementary teachers, but it seems like a real continued gap in capacity at that level.
So I would just say this: you have to call your state legislator. They're the ones who make all those regulatory rules for us, and that's why there's only one course that's a survey course, and many students don't major in history. And we know why, because many of them have not had a good social studies experience, and they're like, I don't want to do this. And so, I would just say contact your local state legislator and tell them you need more social studies in teacher prep.
Thank you for that. I think this is a great time to remember that after we have the standards written, we're going to be creating a K-8 model curriculum, not mandated, model curriculum that people can pull from, which will have resources and activities and assessments that elementary school and middle school teachers will be able to implement directly into the classroom. But again, I hope Ed Dorgan's still on the call. This sounds like maybe this needs to be a push from the public affairs side of CCSS. How can we bolster the requirements for pre-service teachers that are going into elementary to make sure that their social studies is included. But at this point, I do want to get to questions. Thank you, Jen, for your point. I'd like to get to some questions if possible. Maybe in the chat, or if someone wants to open up their mic. Maybe there are no questions and I have a couple more that I could ask as well.
Any content specific questions for us?
I think one of the things people ask a lot about is resources. Many, I have an elementary lens, but many of our teachers say if there's things that are too hard to read, or commercial resources that are perhaps leave a lot to be desired. So are there resources that you are aware of? Sam, looks like here.
Hi, Jen, and for all of you, I am excited and humbled to share that just the Mohegan Tribe has created an educators project website that I can certainly share the credentials in the chat. It's password protected, and my role as the Director of Curriculum and Instruction is to write curriculum with Mohegan Tribe history, past and present. So I will certainly share that with you guys. You can access that, reach out to me at any time for questions. And I also provide PD to schools and districts. You can reach out to me as well. I can only speak for my tribe at this time, but I'm here to help everybody.
I wanted to know if there's any way that each of you could provide your email addresses, that if we do have questions later on, that we can get in touch with you. Also, in terms of resources, I know there's a wealth of resources in African-American heritage literature for children at the elementary level. I know because my historic collection upstairs is extensive. And I've been collecting since the 70s. So it goes back quite a ways. And that's one of the challenges that I think exists too. And I wanted to have your feedback on it, is that there's a lot of literature out here that is now being discarded. I was totally appalled at the number of books that are substantive that are being just thrown out. And it has to be, I mean, even things like Toni Morrison's work, come on. And I'm getting things like that where you can get a book for $1 from out West, and it's Toni Morrison, for God's sake, you know? How can we, not even how can we, but is there any way that there can be a mandatory program for diversity and inclusion with literature, you know, at the collegiate level, so that the young people who are coming in are prepared? You know, so many of them don't know the resources that exist out there. So what's being done at the collegiate level to deal with that?
Thanks for that. Just really quickly, I do want to let everyone know that's on the team that the folks that are signed on as diversity consultants, so that would be Michael Barton, Dr. Yancey here, Chris Newell. We saw the video of Jason Chang and also Juan Coronado, who is has expertise with Latino studies and also veterans experiences. All of those folks will be available for consultancy for your writing, right? We built them into the grant. So yes, they will have access. I didn't share all their emails just now, but you will have access to that, and they'll be meeting with you time and again. Steve?
Yeah, Michael, if you don't mind, a question to you. We're going to be rolling out in the K-5 standards and also in the model curriculum. There's LGBTQ included in that. Other states that have done that have there's been in some cases some fairly fierce opposition to that. I know Connecticut is not like those states, I'm hopeful, but are there hints that how can we, is there a way that we can avoid that, or what are strategies to hopefully avoid that as we proceed?
So like New Jersey and California are very explicit that this is what you have to teach. Like you said, Connecticut is more like just woven in, and But I would just say, I don't, the pushback comes in that you're indoctrinating the students, right? That all of a sudden this curricula is going to make your student queer, right? Like that's really what the pushback is. And what's fascinating is this has been happening for so long, right? So I guess I would just say, as we do these forums and as you think about working, or as you work with teachers, what is it that gets them to think that way, right? And hopefully throughout studying history, that this is just another narrative that has been produced for decades, that gays are coming to, indoctrinate your children. And so I think that if we're just like not, yeah, and I think the other thing too is providing the resources like Jen said and everybody wants, right? Like, so, we're not doing anything wrong. So I'll think more about it though.
So as we're closing,
I want to
go ahead. Yes.
No, I just want to go back to the question about the banned books, and I think this is something that we really do need to pay attention to,
Yes.
very explicitly in our districts, about perhaps what not officially is being removed off the shelves, but perhaps in an informal way. I think we need to pay attention to that. And it's not just the kind of top 10 that you see like on the news, whatever. There are critical texts that are being removed that, to me, I think, we need to pay attention in Connecticut as well. And I just wanted to go back to that point. And I think I didn't see the educator that brought that forward, but I thank you for bringing that forward. One of the things that I did just want to mention really quickly, there are tons of resources out there, that have been elevated within the last 2 years in particular, when it comes to African-American history, African diaspora history. One of the just real informal tools that I just want to throw out there is the blackpast.org. It's the largest digital African-American archive that's really out there, and it has tons of resources from speeches, other primary sources, video recommendations, books. It has digital profiles of individuals, groups, organizations. It's really accessible at all grade levels. It's one of the largest digital archives format. It's blackpast.org. And I just throw that out there, but I will also put my contact information in the chat. Happy to speak and consult with anyone.
Thanks so much. We're going to go to Lauren with her hand raised, but then after Lauren's point or question, I'm not sure what it is, we're going to close with advice to the writers. What one piece of advice do you have for each of the writers, just so you can kind of think about that as Lauren's going. Go ahead, Lauren.
I just wanted to thank you, but I wanted to put out into the space too, as I'm hearing kind of board meetings and community conversations, not just where I work, but in other spaces, that there's been a lot of language around pushback about teaching activism. And so I just wanted to kind of call that out in this space too, that we're going to have to pay attention to some of that language along with the banning books piece, because that's kind of flowing from ideology, indoctrination, and now teaching kids to be activists is becoming a concern. So I know we don't have a lot of time. Maybe at another time, I'd love to kind of hear what this group thinks about some of those pieces and how we can navigate that and be really clear in our work, because obviously it ties in with our big themes that we're working on. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So maybe as we close here in the last 2 minutes, maybe if you want to address what Lauren asked, or if you want to give a piece of advice to the writers as we're going forward, what's one practical piece of advice that you have for the writing teams as we move forward? And let's go in reverse order from what we had before. Let's start with, sorry to put you on the spot, Nitsa. Let's start with Nitsa.
I think having gone through this process recently, I would recommend that we remember the following. It is not about you, I'm sorry, it's about the kids. We might not all agree, but it's not about me. That is really put that picture of the students in the center of their table when you're writing. I also think that we have to really be mindful about what I like to call the critique of liberalism. Who is doing the writing, who's the content committee. So if I am a Puerto Rican and all Puerto Ricans are writing and a white person tells me I'm not good enough to write my own content, think about that. So what I want to say, like, measure our words and be wise. Cállese la boca, like keep quiet if we don't have anything nice to say.
All right, thank you so much. Let's go to Chris Newell, please.
I would say have practical expectations. When it comes to Native history, it took multiple generations for the level of erasure to, get to its level here in the state of Connecticut. And as somebody that's, once again, a second generation, I realize that it's gonna really take multiple generations to undo it. But as a Native person living in the state, raising, Pequot children, we need your allyship, because the weight of undoing that erasure should not fall 100% on the shoulders of the Native people in the state. It's really something that we need to work on together. So we're really looking for allyship going forward as well. So I'll stop right there before I go too long.
Okay, Brittany Yancey.
Yeah, I just echo what has already been stated, but I think the idea of putting the student in the center of this process speaks to the point that I said earlier about being able to see every student in their full selves, allowing them to see themselves in the curriculum and in the classroom and in their educational experience as in their full humanity. And that requires eliminating the barriers, right, that are embedded within our educational system and our process and our textbooks. It also requires us, and I'm going to say it, it's also going to require us to decenter whiteness in this process. We understand the level of white supremacy that is embedded in our educational system, and we really have to make that part of this process of coming to the table interested in eliminating the barriers so we see all of our students in their full selves, and really being able to offer that. And so I'm looking forward to working and collaborating with you in this process, and in anything that I can do to help. I'm certainly here.
Okay, let's go with Sam, please.
I would suggest reaching out to experts in the topic, reaching out to active Native nations when we're talking about Native American studies. And I would also keep professional development needs in mind for your teachers. Are you able to reach out to Native nations to provide professional development, or are you able to have experts come to you to help your educators? I would keep that in mind.
Okay, and we're going to finish off with Gadraya.
So again, everybody echoing what everybody said, I would just say this again: when you're doing this and it's strong and there's a lot of things there and you're not afraid of what the pushback is going to be, then you can start, like, once you go in with everything, then people might make some changes and say, well, how about this, how about that? But if you don't go with all of the thrust, then we're not going to be able to put things in, right? It's going to be like, oh, we already did it and we're done. But if we go with a lot of things and we are very bold with this, then there may be some chances for people to compromise on a tiny bit of things, but it's not going to be the reverse. Nobody's going to say, let's go back and add this, add that, right? Like, so I just say, go bold, go hard or go home. That's what Aunt Wendy says.
All righty. Thank you so much to our panelists today. I felt that it was very enlightening. What I'm hearing is that for so many years, decades, centuries, representation has lacked. And what we really need to make sure that we're doing is folding that in a big way, so that when people are making decisions in their classrooms, they have the materials and the direction they need to go ahead and make those decisions. We're going to roll right into our next piece of the, maybe we should give them a round of applause if we can. Maybe give them a round of applause. Thank you so much again.